and now ZD the final decision of us. So we have the 3 challenges and 3 doing well. With the 3 challenges, one thing that the first point that we still have some negative attitude about the inclusive education from the both side, supply and demand side, especially with the demand side, that is especially on the communities. The second challenge that they are limited the coordination among the line sector at the own level, from the national level to the local level of multi-stakeholder on implementing inclusive education. The last challenge, we think that the institutionalized pre-service teacher training on the inclusive education. Even that we have a lot of experience on that, but we still limited on that. With that doing well, we can say that we're very proud on the strong legal framework on inclusive education, including the transforming special education into the provincial inclusive education resources center. The second, the things that we experiencing on the inclusive education, but not yet at scale. As we all say that we have the 20 years of the inclusive education experience. The last thing that we can say that we have a lot of the successful inclusion of the person with disability in Vietnam. My friend and my group that is joking that I'm one of the successful model. But I'm not sure that I'm the successful or not. Here the key responses. The most important thing that we want to promotion of the communication for the development using the children or person with disability as role model and engagement of the DPOs in all stake level. Secondly, that the compulsory pre-service teacher training model on disability inclusive education. This is very important with us. And the last thing that we need, as the first day we on the panel discussion, we talk about the National Council on Disability. So that's why we need to strengthening the operation of the National Council on Disability, because of the here we have the 2 ministries, and on behalf of the DPO side, we are on the National Council on Disability members. So that's why we need to strengthening this operation. And about the expectation on the inclusive education planning course, we say that a lot of things we want to learn, but we have to prioritize that to 3 things. First is about the leadership and management for the education staff. The secondly is about the education financing for the disability inclusion education planning. And the last thing that the qualities we that talk about the curriculum, learning support and assessment. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vietnam. All right, who's next? Under time, so we've gained a little bit of time, so that's great. Who wants to go next? Kenya. and then Fiji is next.
I'm just hitting the others here well. So we don't have to do this again. All right, that's next. You mean you're not presenting for Cambodia?
No.
All right, here we go.
So this is the Kenyan presentation, and the challenges we came up with We decided to write 4. You can read up to 3. But we shall keep for record. The first challenge was lack of education sector analysis in inclusive education planning. We have realized that although we do a lot of planning, this is the first time we are realizing we have never done a comprehensive education sector analysis on inclusive education. Therefore, the concept is still not very well understood in the planning concept. Then, low understanding of the inclusive education concept in planning is a challenge that not all of us, or all of us are not at the same level of understanding, and therefore we can't plan as one team with the same understanding. We have a challenge of lack of data on children with disabilities for planning purposes. And therefore, we make plans but not with evidence or actual data. And therefore, we do some projection of what we think, but not the realities on the ground, given the lack of data. Then we have existing practices that perpetuate segregation mode of learning. And therefore, it is taken almost like this is the normal way. And therefore, when we plan, we don't see the deeper meaning of the inclusive education. What do you think is going well in Kenya? We think we have policies and legislation. Because even our constitution, we have a policy now, and we have even internal policies that are very well grounded on inclusive education, although we may not have implemented them to the full, but they exist. We have structures and institutions that are in place. In the Ministry of Education, for example, we have a directorate of special needs, and therefore at the policy level, it is there. We have institutions that train teachers on teaching and training in disabilities. We have even universities that are training. We have education assessment and resource centers, but they may not be functioning to the level, but they exist. They are there. We have a vibrant civil society in Kenya that has really helped this debate to be kept alive. And that is how even government is actually realizing there is a need to actually sit and discuss the issue of inclusive education. We have the existence of competence-based curriculum. Kenya is in the process of finalizing the review of the curriculum. And even from this experience we have had here, we are even saying with my colleagues, the moment we land back in Kenya, we are going back to that curriculum and see, is it really giving what we have learned and we have shared today? There is political goodwill from the highest levels of the political divide, including the president himself. He has directly and personally committed, and he's the one who actually launched our policy on the disabilities mainstreaming, and he has personally given his commitment on what we need. Key responses to the challenges. One is we need strategic and systematic communication mechanisms to educate all levels of leadership on inclusive education so that everybody becomes a champion. Institutionalize the education sector analysis as a prerequisite for inclusive education planning. That there will be no good plan if you don't do an education sector analysis to actually get the actual baselines and what you need as data. Institution adapt new threats in measuring disabilities. We only count these people, but the functionalities and actually the deeper meaning of those disabilities are never captured in data. Therefore, sometimes it becomes a bit difficult to make policies based on the data that we have collected. So we think we need to revisit the issue of how do we measure disabilities. Is it by functionalities? Is it by maybe what we see, and how far can we go in that disaggregation? We need to review and the policies, practices that promote this segregation so that we institutionalize now what exactly we want to implement within our policies and laws to see it happen at all levels. What do you like to see covered in an education sector, inclusive education planning course? We say the first thing, communication and advocacy for inclusive education is very key for us so that everybody can now get the message. And we need to maybe structure it in a way that it is understood by different levels and different functionaries within our society. Training in new trends and innovations in collection of data and the measuring of disabilities. It's an area we may all need to go through so that and have a standard universal measurement mechanism. Then training in education sector analysis for inclusive education. Education sector analysis is a new concept in some areas. When it comes to inclusive education, it becomes even more new now. And therefore, we may need all of us to actually get a beginning through a course so that we can do the same thing all over. And I think that was the Kenyan reason.
Thank you, Kenya. Fiji goes next. Really excellent presentation. So interesting to hear what you think.
All right.
Hi everyone. What you see on the first slide is an open invitation for you to come to Cambodia. It's a bit of lush, white sandy beaches. So we are hoping that you would come over to help us with the plan. Anyway,
Close.
okay.
Excellent background.
Okay, for our key challenges, we have listed it as the first one is teacher training. Our teacher training institutions have to do a little bit more in terms of offering special and inclusive education into their course content. Second one is attitude. As we mentioned yesterday, it plays a big role in terms of creating awareness and advocacy of the needs of people with disabilities, in particular children in the education sector. Not only that, also in the community. And our third key challenge is leadership and management. We feel that we have to have a more collaborative input from all the stakeholders in disability education in terms of leadership and management. What is going well at the moment is the first one is our data collection in terms of our families. We are able to collect data for children with disabilities in the mainstream schools. We need to strengthen that as well, but we feel that it is going well right now. We also have our laws and policies which mandates the implementation of inclusive education. Our 2013 constitution mandates inclusion of the education of children, compulsory education of children with disabilities, as well as Section 42 of our Constitution, which advocates for the rights of people with disabilities to education. Our inclusive education policy at the Ministry of Education is another policy that is going well, together with our assessment policy. In terms of our assessment policy, we have provision in the assessment policy where we offer reasonable accommodation to children with disabilities when it comes to national examinations or assessments. For example, provisions of sign language interpreters during assessment, provision of enlarged prints in Braille, readers and writers. So that is already mandated in our assessment policy, which is one of the areas that we have said is going on really well. And thirdly, it's finance for now. As we have mentioned in our discussion, we have had a doubled, and it's increasing over the years as we make representations to our government, and that is substantiated with our data from families. We are able to justify well in terms of finance whatever we are trying to get. And also mentioned by my colleague yesterday, there was a survey conducted, and out of the survey, what resulted was Fiji was investing as much as our donor partners were investing in terms of inclusive education in the country. So the key challenges again and our key responses to it. Teacher training. For teacher training, we intend to lobby in with the teacher training institutions to provide inclusive education training. We have been doing this over the years, but we have plans, we have made plans with my colleague at the back that we will need to go and sit personally with the person in charge so that we get this across. Otherwise, in terms of teacher training, inclusive education won't be really a success if we do not have the right teachers to be carrying it out. Attitude, taking into account the suggestions made by our colleagues yesterday, we need to work more collaboratively with our stakeholders to be more proactive in advocating for the education of children with disabilities. So in that, we intend to also involve our youth group, our church leaders, in order to bring about a positive change in attitude. And key challenge number 3, which is leadership and management. We intend to create a multi-sectorial committee on inclusive education. And this has to be driven from a Ministry of Education approach. I think we missed one slide, sorry, but that is on training needs. What do we want to be under the training needs? We discussed 2 issues from that one. The first one is actually we wanted clarity on disability inclusive education as part of a big component of the training program. And the second one is assessment and curriculum, if it could be well defined within the training needs on what it is about assessment and curriculum in terms of inclusive education. So in general, once again, a thanks and appreciation to the organizers of this workshop. We have indeed learned a lot. And our perhaps only recommendation or issue is how can we get support for a similar roundtable meeting in the Pacific?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fiji. Round of applause. So we have 3 presentations down, 5 to go. Who wants to go next? Okay, South Africa.
Good. What is this? Oh, this is why. Oh, the magic. Okay, great. Always wanted a magic wand. Okay, just quick feedback. It's only 4 slides from South Africa. And I think we want to start off with the little picture there that shows what inclusion is about. It's not about children with disabilities separate. Those children play ring-a-rosie there, and there's a child with a wheelchair, as well as other children as part of that. The key challenges, we divided it into systemic challenges about implementation at school level, infrastructure access, class sizes, staff provisioning, the whole range of stuff that one can put in that little suitcase of systemic. But we did separate out teacher capacity and knowing the policies. We need to start there, though it doesn't help you have quite a lot of what you think is good policies, but nobody knows about it. It's the best kept secret. From those who need to implement it, knowledge, skills, and all of that. And lastly, no surprise, funding. I think some of the achievements that we want to highlight, just 3 of them, is those very same policies that are there and enabling. The CIAS that we talked about earlier, which is an important milestone. And then also what we have shared earlier around what is for us an example, and moving into the education system is that the ECD curriculum has included children with disabilities from the start, which had a very good and positive impact. Those challenges I just highlighted, what we said that the responses to that would be that the education sector analysis to be done so that we can look exactly what are the gaps in the areas. whether it is about what enables the policy levels or whether it is at service delivery level. Otherwise, we're still keeping to plan in an ad hoc way and just put plasters on a system that is not working. Skilling of educators and managers in the ethos and mechanisms of inclusive education, and policy and norms for all school funding, not for inclusive education funding, but for funding for all schools, should include adequately for inclusion of children with disabilities. So that we don't have a separate fund for inclusion. Inclusion should be in the mainstream funding. What we would like to see in inclusive education training course, a rights-based approach around accountability. No surprise, the third one there, you expected that from me. And how to perceive, it says early childhood development, inclusion from the start, and how to change perceptions of teachers and others in the education system towards inclusive education. Ideas, we thought, and believe it or not, only came up with one. And the next step might be, and because UNESCO is a very good convener of ministries of education, to have ministers of basic education across the world to commit to inclusive education. Then this week we have celebrated the 100th birthday of Nelson Mandela, which is the father of our nation. And I just want to conclude from South Africa's side. His birthday was on the 18th, for those of you who don't know, it's Nelson Mandela Day. The disabled do not need the patronage of the non-disabled. It is not for them to adapt to the dominant and dominating world of the so-called non-disabled. It is for us to adapt our understanding of a common humanity, to learn of the richness of how human life is diverse, to recognize the presence of disability in our human midst as an enrichment of our diversity. That's it.
I also have to say he had been working on a PowerPoint all week that was gorgeously formatted based on the framework, and then he cut it down for time. So it was beautiful.
Thank you.
But if
very
you could
much.
share the original too.
And who wants to go next? Nepal? Great.
Yes.
Good afternoon. We are four people from Nepal. Mr. Jimmy already left because of his flight. We three people are here. Me, Ganesh Paudel, and Subiksha Karki. And this is Nepal, and I will not go through the detail. The key challenges. We are in restructuring process. It is an opportunity as well as challenge for us. Our government is going to develop new education acts at the federal level, province level, as well as local level. So to extent possible, we will try to incorporate inclusion-related matters in the act. It is very challenging for us, but there is a good sign in the different level. Then the role and responsibilities will be clearly defined in the legal documents. And in the Constitution, it is clearly mentioned. And legal and policy framework, we have already prepared inclusive education policy. It is second amendment. And then ensuring institutional capacity and expertise to undertake assessment, screening, and referral system. It means we have that sort of system, but we need to strengthen that system. How? That is big question mark. Only the education ministry cannot do everything. So how to coordinate other agencies and how to prepare EMIS. Nowadays in Nepal, we used to say IEMIS, integrated education information system, not only EMIS. So we have put the integrated word. And not only the tracking individual student, but how to prepare system. That is the main thing. Not only the counting of head is sufficient to support the children with disability. The system need to be prepared. That is best practices we are doing. Then third one is internalization of the concept of inclusive by policymakers. Sometimes we demand fund and we prepare some policy provisions. The authority, high-level authority, sometimes politician cannot properly understand it. So how to help them, facilitate them to conceptualize the concept. This is challenge as well. Then I'm surprised, why we didn't very much discuss on SDG. It is one of the moment, and we nowadays in the world, we are preparing some local level indicators, and the slogan of the SDG, the beginning of the slogan, it is inclusion. So I'm surprised here, So how to integrate these things, and not only the, UNESCO, but how to internalize these things in UNESCO, IIEP, and UNICEF, and other agencies. I feel challenged even in this room. So in the country, we will fully align the inclusion-related activities. Okay. A Nepal follow-up plan, finalizing act, I have already shared, and the remaining act will also incorporate these things, and we are implementing school sector development plan. Nowadays, we are in the process of revising the school sector development plan, and in the near future, there will be midterm review. So some of the matter will be incorporated during the midterm review, and we have DLI system, disbursement in linked indicator system in SSDP. In our education budget, there are less than 7% contribution from the development partner. Remaining budgets are our own budget. That's why it is not project-based, it is the own budget system. So meaningful participation, sometimes we say participation, not only participation of people with disability, but meaningful participation we have in practice. In the future, we will more focus on it. Identify steps towards inclusive education that are contextualized on the country to country. In the South Asian region, we have similar type of exercises. We have that sort of practices. And in the future, we will align more on it. Topic to be covered in the inclusive education planning courses. It means cross-sectoral coordination, we need more exercise on it. Teaching pedagogy, especially focusing on inclusive education planning, and early identification and referral, and ICT in education. It is the burning need. And then soft skill, pre-vocational skill, and debate. It is the most urgent topic, but unfortunately, we have several times requested to the expert. Unfortunately, it could not be covered. So without vocational and pre-vocational skills, our children will not be benefited. Comment, it was wonderful type of, platform. We learned very much, but because of time management and all these things, we cannot focus. Sometimes we get only 1 minute, 2 minutes. So time is one thing, but sharing values more than time sometimes, Resource library, it should be continued. We'll be more benefited from this. And then as you have presented cake, I will not say anything. You can easily understand this. In terms of inclusive education, it is our reflection. Thank you. These are the okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nepal. Are you making fun of my voice in the back there? And did you know that Nepal presentation was exactly 7 minutes?
All right, who's next?
Ghana? Jalil?
Where'd it go? There we go.
So for those of you who do not know where Ghana is, this is where Ghana is. In the African continent, is in the West African region. So for our key challenges, we said that there is lack of administrative data connecting health and education institutions. Obviously, resource allocation is an issue. We think attitudes. Example is that people don't feel that there's any return on investment trying to push money into learners with disabilities. So this is affecting planning generally. What is going on well? We have done an education sector analysis. We are mainstreaming findings of this. In fact, we have mainstreamed rather these findings in our education sector plans. We have a conducive legislative environment with an IE policy complemented with a costed implementation plan. Of course, there are standards and guidelines for the education IE practice as well. There is some level of data that we have collected on persons with disabilities through surveys, census, and MS. And in terms of responses to some of these challenges, currently we have the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health working together to basically institutionalize screening to address issue on data. With the ESA findings also, we have mainstreamed the ESA content, and it's providing opportunity for resource allocation. At least we know what data we desire in terms of how many people, have disabilities and things like that. CSOs also, in terms of resource allocation, CSOs are engaging and holding government accountable for improved resource allocation for the implementation of the costed plan that we have. NGOs and CSOs are also creating awareness. This is in relation to attitudes. They are creating awareness on the IE policy and also engaging local level and community level stakeholders to support IE. And then we are also using the C4D strategies to change social norms around IE. In terms of the key ingredients we like to see in the IE course, we think that costing for implementing IE will be a very useful thing. Effective M&E system will be good to have. Analysis of demographic data to pull out prevalent rates, of PWDs within a particular cohort, like the basic level, secondary, TVET, etc., could be useful. Then also tools for data collection will be an added value to it in terms of enrollment, and then also coming to analysis and reporting. And general historical trends in IE will be a very good thing to have. And then terminologies and definitions. Of course, we did not add any additional comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ghana. Next, we have Ethiopia, I believe,
Ethiopia or Cambodia?
or Cambodia. Well, I'm going to pick Cambodia. Cambodia ready? Okay.
Cambodia. Here's the clicker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Representative from Cambodia. Let me present about the action plan for the Cambodian side related to the inclusive education. After we have 2.5 day workshop, so we can sum up the idea to set up the action plan for Cambodian. So first of all, about the challenges that we found, we have other challenges, but this is the 3 priority that we face. First one is the lack of accurate and reliable data that is a lack of consistent to the tool for the screening. Yes, and that identification of children with disability. Data is very important for us to produce the planning and projection for the action. So if we collect the data inaccurate, so the plan and action cannot be implemented properly. In Cambodian, we have the collection system in place already. I mean, we have Department of EMIS, and we collect the data from the public school, also the private school, from the national to the subnational level. I mean, the ministry to the province to district into the school. We have the system in place, but for the data related to the disability and inclusive education, we not consider very well, and we collect, but the data that provide from the grassroots level is not accurate, because we have checked with, we used to check I mean, the data at the school level, and the community is not respond each other. So this is the problem at the grassroots level. So yeah. The second challenge is the limit knowledge and capacity in inclusive education planning and implementation among the stakeholder and the Ministry of Education at all levels. And the third challenge is insufficient budget allocation from the government and inclusive education and disability, because we have just set up the department. So we hope that in the future we will have a better plan and policy. So we hope that the budgets from the government will increase for implement related to the inclusive education and disability. However, even we have some challenges, but we have progress in education. The first one is we have a policy on inclusive education just approved last month, and the action plan will be developed soon according to the policy. This policy is updated from the policy on education with the children disability that we have the previous one, and we update into the policy on inclusive education. Yes. Number 2, we have a good relationship between the ministry, partnership, NGO, and UN agencies. So far, we have a good network between among all of them, and we have a working group together. Yes. So this is what we have. And the third point is we have a guideline on the screening, and a working group we have also established. So in order to respond what we have challenged, we have 3 points. We have to harmonize of the screening tool and expand screening program to the whole countries. And second, we have to transfer of competency of National Institute for Special Education that we have just established under the Ministry of Education Control and Special Education Department also, and reinforce of their capacity by international partner to support in like IIP and UNICEF. Yes. And the third point is data accurate lead to better planning and then lead to better budget resource allocation. As I mentioned in the previous, when we have accurate data, is we'll have to develop the planning and framework. So what do we include in the inclusive education planning cost? So we have 4 points. The first is data analysis tool and techniques on inclusive education. Number 2, we have to translate inclusive education policy and framework into action plan, and also the cost plan at national and subnational, including school development plan is very important. And how to measure the attitude and practice regarding to inclusive education and disability. And the last one, teacher training is very important, and including UDL and technology that we have to be considered. For the additional idea and comment, we have to promote vocation training program and career counseling, like skill education as part of inclusive education with disability. And the role of IIP, we need to support that. Yes, after this training. And the last point is good practice or case study, including IP and on the inclusive education training program is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cambodia. And last presentation, we have Ethiopia.
Do you want to sit?
I think I can see.
Yes. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think you all well know me. That's why I'm not coming there. And also I'm coming back at the late presenter because I need more time to talk more and to get contributions from the other countries. Just we put here as a key challenge only 2 points here. In our country, no inclusive education policy is made, and the limited capacity and the common understanding of inclusive planning among planners even. So from when you realize in our country in a sector of Ministry of Education, unfortunately we in Ethiopians are here presenting only from DPOs and from the potential partners or working on a disability movement. We missed the Ministry of Education and UNICEF too as in Ethiopia. So we are sorry for that, but we have a responsibility to share for them in Ethiopia what we learned here. And what is going fine in Ethiopia, inclusive education well addressed in the education sector development progress in 2015-20 plan 5. A key recommendation to the challenge. We put here 3 points as a key recommendation of our challenge. Conduct policy dialogue on the sector with a view of formulating an inclusive education policy. So we face a certain challenge that we don't have a inclusive education policy. So we need to conduct the dialogues on the plan and the inclusive education policy formulation. Build the capacity of DPOs. This is very important, what we observed now, and we learned from different African and Pacific countries here. So build the capacity of DPOs and their involvement in the process of inclusive education planning, we recommend as a part of challenge. Enhance experience sharing among countries and the concerned development partners as well. We would like to see in an inclusive education planning course, appropriate strategy for formulation of inclusive education policy in relation to inclusive education planning. This is one. The next is the challenge encountered in the process of inclusive education planning. And also a workable approach for the creation of common perception among planners. These are what we want to see in inclusive education planning course. Other comments. This kind of seminar for building the capacity of various actors involved in inclusive planning. UNICEF and IEP UNESCO should develop a framework to guide the inclusive education planning and the member status. We are here to recommend, maybe, I don't know, others accept it, because we need common framework to develop inclusive education, because we are realizing like now almost all except us have an inclusive education policy here we presented, but our presentation was in different angle. So we need a common framework just from, if it's possible, for member states. UN agencies are like UNICEF and IAP, UNESCO agents are required to ensure the reliability of the data. Because most of the time, we as a country, Ethiopians, are reporting for UN. But we are also afraid that it's about the reliability of that data. So this UN agent should have required to ensure the reliability of data and scientific approach needed for the collection of and analysis of the AMS data. You waiting and is another talking? Or? Thank you, I have more time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will be moving into the closing session and the wrap up in about 10 minutes. But we thought we would take a couple of minutes if you have any reflections, thoughts, questions to any of the presenters. Mark.
The Ghana delegation has very kindly brought 4 sets of documents. So they're inclusive education policy, which might be of interest, standards and guidelines, which includes things like infrastructure, and a short form of the inclusive education policy. There are only 4, and I want to keep one of each. So if anybody wants it, first 3 hands up.
Well,
Grace doesn't get one.
I'll let you in. I'll let you in on the little secret. They're all available online as well.
Yeah.
So if you don't get a printed copy, it's, in fact, a lot of the Ghana resources that they mentioned and talked about when we were doing the sector analysis, a lot of it is available online and documents and kind of even the historical background. So thanks. Rosangela?
Thank you for all the presentations. I thought every one of them super relevant. I took note of a list of things. I would just like to talk about the SDG for the indicators and how the SDG, why the SDG is missing. And I think it's right. One thing that I just wanted to say, SDG, as you know, across the board, not only SDG 4 is inclusive and accessible of people with disabilities, even when it does not mention people with disabilities because of the Leave No One Behind. But locally, to be pretty interesting, to take a look in the local SDG 4 indicators and see, and the other indicators related, SDG 11 on inclusive cities, etc., how to make sure that children and adults with disabilities are visible there, even if they are not mentioned. But I think especially on SDG 4 here, this would be super important. So there is work to be done locally, and I don't know if in the education sector plan it fits or not, but it fits in the Ministry of Education commitments to SDG. So thank you.
I think it's also really important to include all the SDG information in the concepts and definitions, one of the basic, the intro modules that will be developed here. So, so Jane and Rolando.
So Jim from, this is Rolando.
Okay.
Jim from, sorry. Sorry.
No,
Jim
go ahead.
from UNICEF Nepal Jimmy is following through us live stream, and he told me to suggest if we can facilitate country to country follow-up on the achievements and needs shared to allow specific in-depth follow-up on knowledge exchange, like at Inclusive Education eBay, something like that.
Great idea, and I think Jennifer and Jim, one of you will be discussing it and what will happen afterwards and what type of follow-up will be provided and possible. So I will just let this one sit on the side, but a good point. And Jane?
Just a very quick comment, and just to congratulate the presentations. Unfortunately, I didn't see all of them, but because I had to do something else, but it's really very concrete ideas coming out of the presentations for the follow-up. And I'd just like to mention that for GPE, I'll be taking those back for our internal consultation and for consideration in the development of a new funding mechanism that we have that I'd just like to share with you. It's called the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange Mechanism. And it's a new funding mechanism for developing global goods in terms of research, in terms of data, in terms of peer learning. And we are developing discussion papers on 6 different thematic areas. One on data is already done. We'll have a paper on equity and inclusion. So I will definitely be sharing your ideas for the writer of that paper. There'll be consultations around the paper, so we'll definitely keep in touch on that. And there'll be a call for proposals probably early next year.
Thank you. And just, I see a lot of people writing all this information. I'm really hoping that everything that will be mentioned here or have been presented will be shared and continue to be shared through the community of practice that will be talked about in a little bit. So I don't think everyone's expected to remember everything. South Africa?
Other than thank you and repeating that again to everybody, it was a real learning experience. I just want to come back to something we talked about Wednesday, because that is part of the learning, and that's the country profiles. And I think we committed to update it. And I just want to check whether the Word versions will be provided to us so that we can update it and send it back. And maybe we should set a time for that so that we can send, because I find it very informative to see what is happening and to compare also where we can learn from as countries.
Absolutely. And again, that will be communicated through the information that will be provided after the session on community of practice and the next steps. That was noted from your previous request. And Hannah, please, from the World Bank.
Thanks very much. I think it's been very, very good a couple of days. And I've been very happy also to see within the excellent presentations that there was really that kind of wish for it to continue. And specifically, I think Fiji was mentioning the regional idea for such a thing. And I think that's very good for organizers also to think about it. Different regions have the appetite, as we've mentioned. So I'm very happy to also find ways to support in that in different within different organizations. As I'll also take the information to the TTLs of the World Bank. So whoever works in your countries as a World Bank education sector person, I hope they could have all been here just to hear all this and be able to also work with you. And just very happy to see various organizations going into the same direction with this topic. So thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. Grace, please.
So I look forward to seeing, not me personally, but we look forward to seeing all of you at the Global Disability Summit next week. Thanks for organizing this just before. Good timing. Thank you for all of the insights. I've learned a load here that I'm going to take back to my work in Pakistan, onwards to work in Ghana, but also going to share reflections with our different team that's working on the summit in advance, hopefully, if I can get the write-up done, to feed into our thinking. And I think for the IEP team, this has been really great. And I think we'd welcome further training on this, maybe at our next professional development conference or something like this. So I'll suggest that as well. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Yes. Last comment and.
Yeah. I just want to express my appreciations of this workshop, especially when you invite the people with disabilities, TPOs coming to this workshop because training, because sometimes we are not disabled and we talking about the problem of the people with disabilities. We think that's right, but sometimes it's not. So I really like the statements of Nelson Mandela shared by South Africa. Sometimes the very thin line between inclusion and exclusion, is it really necessary and important, meaningful to the people with disability is a very big question, very thin line, but very important. And hopefully we can jump into the heart of the people with disabilities and we can understand them. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Tori, who will organize us for the next.
Well,
hello then.
Put a sign up saying talk for 5 more minutes.
All right, so we have. That would be fun. I need to make that.
Here at 22, so we could just have a couple. Any more comments?
Okay. For just so everyone knows, after we wrap up, we will have a table outside for the country participants. We have certificates of participation. So outside, Emily and I will be there, and you come up and you'll initial that you got your certificate, and we'll give it to you, and it's very nice and lovely. So, and there were a number of you that we gave badges for the doors to. We need to collect those. So actually, if you have those right now, I will collect them from you. So here, and you will now hear from Jennifer.
No, I just wanted to make sure we get these badges back because we have a limited amount of them, and we gave out 6 for those people with disabilities, so you could have more easy access to the building. So Tori will go around and collect them.
Hold them up, I will collect them.
So now we're going to listen to Jim and Mark, right?
If you would like to finish your evaluations right now, you're certainly welcome.
Just give you 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So 2 minutes for the evaluations.
Just asking for. director at IIEP, who's going to come and do the final concluding remarks. So, first of all, Mark will give you some feedback on the highlights and so on the way forward from the UNICEF perspective, and then I'll do the same from the IIEP perspective, and then Paul will make some final remarks. Thank you.
You did that one? I take that one.
Is that on? Oh, yes, it's on. Right, into the closing straight. It was very nice of a number of the presentations to thank us, but actually it should be us thanking you. And there's a very good reason for this, and we do thank you. We thank you enormously. And I'm going to tell you a very brief story that at the end of last year, Natasha and Jim and I attended 2 workshops on inclusive education, one in Johannesburg in Southern Africa, in South Africa, in fact, and one in Dakar in Senegal, in West Africa. And at those workshops, we were sitting together and we said, we should run a training course on inclusive education because people were talking about it and it was an interesting thing. So we decided that we were going to run a training course on inclusive education. And then it suddenly dawned on us that we didn't actually know very much about inclusive education. We didn't know enough to create a training course on inclusive education. So we thought, well, how do we find out what's really important and what are the ways to go on inclusive education? There are some bits that we've got a good idea on, but there are bits that we don't know anything about. So we thought, well, a lot of countries around the world have made good progress on certain aspects of inclusive education, whether it's collecting data through EMIS, or whether it's having good policies in place, or whether it's trialing using special schools as resource centers for local schools. And we thought, what we'll do is we'll collect all these people, bring them to Paris, and we will suck out their knowledge, and we will use that to create a training course in the future. And that is exactly what we have done. So, and we're going to make a lot of money off this. No, we're probably... Right. So, honestly, thank you very much for sharing all of your expertise. At the very beginning of this course, we said that nobody is an expert on everything, but everybody is an expert on something. And over the last 3 days, I think we've really demonstrated that there have been tremendous inputs which we are going to use in the future and spread around the world. So that's what we've learned, right? So we've learned from you. And I thought it would be quite useful to put this in a sort of an overall context of this great movement towards inclusive education that's going on at the moment. So, as I said, last year, there were these 2 workshops in Western and Eastern Africa. And in the next year and a half, there are all sorts of events and activities going on in inclusive education. And I thought I'd just run through them very quickly, just so that you know that this is sort of like the start of a big process. And so my first slide, oh, by the way, there's going to be a quiz at the end of my presentation, so stay awake. Right. So events and activities. So as most of you know, next week, next Monday and Tuesday, there's the Global Disability Summit in London. Some of you are going. Fred, yeah? Yes. I've actually been told to make sure that you get there safely. Diffid has been in touch with me saying, make sure he gets there. Okay, that's a 2-day summit, and which is going to be filled with extremely important people. I believe the president of Kenya is going, and many ministers of education. Alice Albright from the GPE, our UNICEF executive director is going. It's a massive thing. I think there are 800 very important delegates being invited. And that's next week. In August, in next month, in a few weeks' time, we are planning on publishing the report from the education sector analysis in Ghana. The Ministry of Education is going to publish the report from the education sector analysis in Ghana. And then sometime this year, possibly September, we will publish this is the education sector analysis methodological guidelines. These are these big, thick books that you were told about. So the chapter on inclusive education analysis will be ready this year. The actual volume 3 of the education sector analysis methodological guidelines will be published either later this year or early next year, volume 3. But we're going to make the chapter on inclusive education available before the whole volume is published. And then in October, the UN, the main UN, is publishing a flagship report on disability and development, which has got chapters on each of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there is a chapter on education, which deals with inclusive education, which a number of development partners have contributed to. We led on pulling all the data together for that book. And that will be presented at the, at, what's it called? General Assembly, that's the word. Thank you. UNGA, yeah. And then in October, towards the end of October, the World Bank, USAID, and UNICEF are running what we've called it's called an Inclusive Education Clinic for Africa. That will be involving Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, and Zanzibar, and Malawi, I think is the 5th country. Yeah. So only 5 countries, and that is for government representatives and also development partners working in those 5 countries. That's why we've kept it a bit smaller. Next year, as you heard earlier in the week, next year in June in Latin America, probably Colombia, UNESCO is running an Inclusive Education Forum, Salamanca plus 25 years. And then also, as you've heard, the Global Education Monitoring Report. We can make all these slides available on the platform, by the way. The Global Education Monitoring Report is going to focus on inclusive education in 2020. So there's a lot happening over the next year and a half. Yeah. Right. Now, so that's why we set up the round table, what we've learned from the round table and why we set it up, what the overall picture of things at the global level is looking like. So let's look at what you've learned or what you would like to focus on from the round table. So yesterday, I think, during the coffee break, you were all asked to put stickers on that board, right? And I think you all did. You all got 3 stickers for areas where you would be interested in receiving training. You all remember? Yeah. Okay. So overall, this is the quiz, by the way. Overall, which got the highest score? Winner from Fiji at the back. Teachers. Yeah. Second one. Money. Money's much more important. Next one. Yes. And the fourth one, there, 4 of them stood out overall. Which one? Attitude? No. Leadership and management. Who said that? Well done. But in the room, of course, we've got a mixture of people. We've got government government people, we've got development partners, people like me and Natasha and Jim, and we've got DPOs, representatives from DPOs in the room. So what do you think? Would it look different for each of those organizations? Okay, so governments. No, but you're very, very close. Joint, equal, everybody is focused on teachers. Yeah. How much of your education budget goes on paying teachers? Yeah, 90 is usually closer. And leadership and management, which sort of makes sense. Finance is next. And I think there's a third one on this one. No, yeah, well, 2 equal. Yeah. And data and evidence. Okay, and that sort of makes sense. Yeah. What about development partners? People like me, what am I interested in? No, I'm also interested in the money. I thought I'd made that clear over the last 2 days. Development partners are interested in it's financial planning, and that's what it really is. It's not so much interested in the money. Second one, teachers. Again, everybody recognizes that teachers is important. And development partners, those are the only 2 standout priorities. Those are the only 2 key priorities. Everything else got very low scores. And what about DPOs? So we got data, laws and policies. Data, right. So all government counterparts never think that DPOs are soft, fluffy organizations. They're data-driven, yeah? So data is number 1. Number 2? Teachers. Teachers, yeah, easy. What about number 3? DPOs. No, it's it's actually the only one, learning support. Yeah, which I think makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I don't think there's another one. That's it. Right. I've got one more thing to say. One more thing to say, but that's the end of the presentation anyway, and the end of the quiz. So the only last thing to say is that, as Natasha kept hinting at, what we're going to do over the next few months is we're going to keep the platform open. Yeah, the platform that you've all been engaging in. We're going to keep it open, and we're going to do 2 or 3 things on the platform. So one thing is that we want to revise the conceptual framework, and we would like your advice or suggestions on how to do that. The second thing that we would like is that if any of you come across any useful resources, we would like you to share them using the platform, yeah, with us. In the longer term, we'll have to find a better way of storing them or housing them. But in the meantime, please use the platform if you come across anything that you might think will be useful to other people, other countries. And the third thing is that we would like to start exchanging ideas on what a training course, an IIEP training course, would actually look like in the future, because we are intending to start designing something from now. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you.
Okay, Mark. Well, thank you very much for that. I was just about to introduce a colleague, but he's just left. So, okay. So Mark talked about the kind of the big picture going forward, the key sort of global events and so on. I'm going to focus in a little bit more on what we're intending to do in terms of the training between, particularly, the collaboration between UNICEF and IIEP, but also other development partners, some of whom are here. And And first of all, just some general feedback from the organizers' perspective. We did find it a very interesting meeting. We found there's a lot of vitality in the exchange and so on. What we tried to do is really focus on sessions where there would be a lot of dialogue rather than sort of information transfer. And I think that worked quite well. Having said that, there was more information transferred through the platform before we actually started, and that process will continue for some time afterwards. So we're going to keep the platform alive for several months. We're not sure exactly how long yet. I think the second point is that we didn't really have a dedicated session to look at the conceptual framework. But for me, I think the conceptual framework worked quite well, because I think it took us beyond that sort of economistic framework, which you often get where you're really looking at supply and you're looking at demand. So it's separating out different components and bringing in the enabling environment. Although, as we agreed, it shouldn't really just be sitting on the top there, because you need the enabling environment at the different levels of the system. I think, as our Cambodian colleagues said, if they wanted a training course, they want it to respond to the needs at the national level, the sub-national level, and taking it right down to the level of the school itself, which is interesting, school development planning. Because I think traditionally, often planning is seen to be just something that happens at the national level and not so much further down. We know in a lot of systems these days, a lot of the planning actually takes place, particularly with the local management of schools, actual planning takes place at the level of the school. I think going forward, one thing that we should do is we should take that conceptual framework and start to develop maybe a theory of change. Now, I've got some reservations about global theories of change, because I think context is so important. So it might be more like regional theories of change at the country level, etc. I think one thing that really came out very strongly is the need for some kind of political economy analysis, because the contexts are so different. And we heard several times about issues affecting the incentivization of teachers. You know, from Kenya, particularly strategies that were brought in to incentivize teachers, which actually backfired and so on. So I think that's very important. We think the mix of ministry, development partners, and disabled persons organizations worked extremely well. And of course, having people with disabilities amongst us did remind us of the reality, and that's the first port of call if you're trying to find out what the issues are in a system, is to ask the people themselves, the people with disabilities. I think it was interesting to see on the training preferences that very few people mention the demand side. For me, it's actually, maybe it's just from my perspective, it's often the most complex is actually the demand side, but that's just a comment. But it was clear there was very strong demand for training in education sector analysis and education sector planning. Another thing which came out very, very strongly, which might not be a key component often in the way that we look at sector planning in IIEP, is the need to look at communication for development and awareness raising, and how that actually has to be a key component of planning when you're looking at things like, particularly issues like people with disabilities. Teachers is an area which many of you identified for further training. Now, as I stated on day one, teacher education is not the focus of IIEP in terms of our training, in terms of, you know, the development of curriculum and in terms of modes of delivery and pedagogy and so on. That's not really the focus of IIEP. However, in UNESCO, we do have the Teachers Task Force. So I think some of these areas that have been identified, we need to discuss them with UNESCO and with other partners. However, if you're looking at teachers' education, does have we have to change our conceptualization of teacher education in terms of education sector analysis and planning, because it does have resource implications, and it also has in terms of cost and human resources. Because, for example, if you're looking at teacher supply and distribution, you need teachers who are trained with specialist skills to be distributed across the country. So normally we're looking at, do we have enough teachers in mathematics and science and language and stuff? We also have to look at, do we have specialists in special education? Are they distributed correctly throughout the country? So I think that's incredibly important. And I think a new component which really comes in it in terms of teacher education is having classroom assistants. Because as we've seen, a lot of teachers are resistant to inclusive education because it actually puts a lot more burden on them. But if they feel they're going to be supported by classroom assistants, that's another issue. I think a lot of people, and it came out again today, I think from South Africa, I think that essentially inclusive education is not something different. It's not something at a side. It actually just means good quality education, because good quality education means differentiation in the classroom. It means that not everyone's working at the same pace. It means you've not got a didactic model of teaching. It means differentiation. But that is actually something which is very, very difficult to achieve. And if you look at some of the research, for example, by the World Bank, they will say that a lot of teacher education, for example, in Africa, has been a failure because it hasn't translated into changes in the way that people actually teach. So that's something to bear in mind. It's actually a very difficult task to get teachers to change from that very didactic approach we see in many countries to that differentiated approach. Many of you highlighted promising practices. And at the same time, many people said these never went to scale. So I think perhaps one thing we should also look at when we design the training course is the design of pilots. How you design a pilot in a robust way so that it will go to scale. In my own experience working for UNICEF and DFID previously, sometimes pilots don't go to scale because the pilots are not piloted by the ministry. The ministry is not involved. It's an NGO that does a pilot, and then they go to the ministry, say, can you please scale up? And the ministry say, we don't have the resources. So I think if we can get the ministries behind the pilots, there's much better chance. I think the other issue, apart from the piloting and the scaling up, the other issue, of course, is mainstreaming. We haven't really discussed this concept very much, and it means different things to different people. But I think a lot of what we need to achieve in inclusive education, we can achieve it if, for example, we reform pre-service training and it's just a part of pre-service training. If we reform in-service training, it's just a part of in-service training. And then the costs do not go up so exponentially as trying to do it as something different. Andreas, I think another key message that came out is that ECD needs to be part of our focus if we're doing this training course. And so that's something which IIEP, which we're taking on board, because we're also developing a new course next year on training for early childhood education and development. So what came out of the meeting? I think one of the major challenges, despite what BFIT tried to say, is cost, or the perception of cost. Because BFIT said, cost is not the problem, cost is the solution, yeah? Another very important challenge, I think, particularly in this area of inclusive education, is the need for cross-sectoral collaboration. And I saw one of the countries mentioned there that they actually had a National Council for Disability. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in different countries and how these national councils manage to harmonize the different ministries. And we've got previous experience to learn from in things like HIV/AIDS education, and it's a similar challenge, I think, in early childhood development. So when a country decides, what a country decides to focus on will depend, in terms of inclusive education, what a country decides to focus on will depend on the reality in that country. Because I think another thing we discussed a little bit was, are we narrowing down inclusive education just to looking at disability? And as I tried to explain, that is not the intention. Disability is simply a focus. So in some countries, other issues will be a major focus. I think we also need to reassure ourselves that we're not just in brand new uncharted territory here. We know that inclusion is part of the human rights discussion, but we also know that inclusion is part of the equity agenda. And there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment by various agencies in looking at equity analysis, and I think inclusion is part of that equity analysis. So that's my sort of background comments. In terms of the specific ways forward, we assure you that the meeting will be very well documented. It's in very good hands, and we'll be sharing this documentation with you on the platform. And as I said, we'll keep the platform open for at least 3 months, possibly more. And then the idea is to generate some kind of community of practice. We're not sure exactly how to do this yet and where to position. You know, if we have a sort of website on it, we're not sure where to position it, but we'll make that decision fairly soon. And what we will do, I think, IIEP and UNICEF, what we have decided is that we will develop quite a generic training course on planning for inclusive education. And we'll probably start with one region, and then we'll move to another region, and we'll move around regionally. And at the same time, I think we will be developing more in-depth courses in terms of things like simulations and so on in relation to inclusive education in due course. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. It's been really interesting and really good fun being with you over the last 3 days. And I'm sure that we've started something which we will keep the momentum. It's been quite a focused meeting, and we'll ensure that we're focused going forwards, and we'll keep in touch with the community of practice, and then we'll see where we go from there. So Paul, if you'd like to make a few final comments, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello.
Okay.
Thanks very much. You know, IIEP is hosting a lot of events, training, and we receive many people, but there was something special about this, this workshop. There were many very good vibes and going on in the building, and it's something that you have given to us coming here, but it was also coming from IIEP staff, because I think there was some innate sympathy to the work you're doing. Most of you are long-term advocates and experts on the inclusive and disability inclusive education. And you know, as planners, we had to be moved toward that direction. And we all have our epiphany moments, you know, statisticians getting to realize that, okay, that's also their job. I look here just on the first row at Natasha when we were at GP, remember? That was one of these moments where I came aware, and then many others followed. And just to quote a more personal, my son is in a primary school, public primary school, Skitty School, and they are quite pioneers. And I saw firsthand the work of support, you know, support staff for teachers, and how much a change it made, and how it changed the way the children were interacting together, and it works beautifully. So that's very, very good. We heard that, you know, with Mark laying some big events and opportunities, And with the SDGs, it's a good opportunities and it's a good time to go further on that. And it's quite optimistic time. At the same time, you were aware of the challenge. And not fully endorsing, the UN values about exploitation that you, but I think we all have a role in taking this to next stage and thinking not about IIP. We have on education sector analysis, on education planning, on the conduct of reform in Paris, in our regional bureau in Dakar, in our regional bureau in Buenos Aires. We are going to, to take the lessons, to use those of us who are present as trainers of trainers and to disseminate all these good practice and ideas you have. It's probably after you heard our UNESCO ADG for education, and she has some street cred on her policy in Italy, on mainstreaming some good policies. You probably heard also from Susan Grant-Lewis, our director, how much she's committed to it. So we can give you the feeling that it's really endorsed by the institution. So it's probably only thanks for that, but no less than thanks to many people that made this possible. So I like to thank the large team of people who organized this technical roundtable, and I look a little at my paper. I try not to forget anybody. Well, our colleagues at UNICEF have been, it's been a wonderful collaboration, really, and including Mark, of course, and Natasha. Our colleague France Mijon at UNESCO headquarters, and Katiana Kubarka, where is she? She's not here. Of the Global Education Monitoring Report, who provide key inputs. Here at IAP, several teams contributed in many ways. Well, Jim and Jennifer, of course, that you know well, but beyond them, their leadership, they were strongly supported by Tori McKillop. Is she here? Oh, sorry. Yeah, still on the job. Émilie Bourgois, Nathalie Frédéric, Nouralia Zamri. Our information service team was fantastic, and particularly thanks to Philippe, you're here. Philippe Abouavon, Alexandra, that was there, Julien Amou, and Estelle Zadra. Narit Mang for the IT support, and from IIP Dakar, Befit, who I think was enthusiastic about the whole session too. And finally, thanks to the UNESCO Pompier and Security Officer who have been assisting and on standby for all 3 days. It is always the participants that determine the success of an event like this, and we've been honored to host participants from government, disability people's organizations and development partners, including colleagues from UNICEF, GPE, USAID, DFID, and the World Bank. So thanks to all. Thanks to all for their contribution and engagements. We look forward to working with you in the future, whether it is through our training activities, applied research, and technical support in countries. So thank you all. I think this is really a success, and we look forward for the next steps. Thank you very much.
That's it. Okay. I have one request. There is one person in UNICEF called Nancy Vega, and she organized sending the money. She organized sending the money to all the UNICEF offices to pay for travel, because UNICEF paid for travel for this course. And would it be possible for everybody on the count of 3 to say thank you, Nancy? Yeah? Okay. Hang on. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.